Yes. Hey, happy Monday. So excited to bring back Tracy Pleschourt with me today. We've been doing this series of power coaching, impactful power coaching, and we're jumping on together. And it's been really interesting because she's helping me. I'm getting coached, which is such an honor. Thank you, Tracy.
My pleasure.
And we started off with my first session was in the summer. So just kind of the chaos of the summer. And I know a lot of moms can relate wearing so many different hats and just business. And then we have kids and then we have spouse and we have all these different things. And then by the time Tracy and I got into our next session, school's back in session. So it could be more of a business focus. And we circled around that. And today is my third session with Tracy. And yet here we are again with different barriers, and I really want our listeners to hear that because this is the beauty of getting coached is every time we enter a session, every single time we enter a session, we are coming in with new barriers because we're all living life. We're all going through day-to-day things that happen. And that's kind of what kicked off Tracy and I's conversation today. Either as we started talking, I'm like, this is actually what I want to talk about today. We both, I own a place to rent and it got trashed by some people staying there, like to the point where everything needs redone. Cat peed everywhere and dog bit holes through carpet. The couch needs to go. So as we came into this session, that's a huge other stressor at my moment. So Tracy, I know I'm like spewing everything, but as we were talking about this, I'm like, I think this is where our session goes is true barriers versus self-induced barriers.
Yep.
And so let's
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah. So I think that's such a great setup because I want people to really think about their own life, their own day-to-day experiences, and recognize that we all have these barriers or we all have these obstacles. Some of them can be like true out of the blue curveballs like you just had, where the rental property has been trashed. And yes, that came out of nowhere. And that's definitely a problem. And it's something that needs to be solved. And there's all sorts of thoughts stemming around that circumstance. And then there's those obstacles, those barriers that maybe aren't so tangible. It's something like a season or, kids are back in school. And then we have all of these thoughts around it that create unwanted feelings. And so it's a little bit less tangible, or I guess it's maybe more of an abstract circumstance, right? So I want just to point that out. I think you did a beautiful job illustrating it, but I want to just really note that obstacles, barriers, they come in all shapes and sizes, right? And the way you can identify it is, how are you feeling right now? So you and I got on this call and I'm like, hey, how are you? And you're like, well, and so that is a great way to just check in with yourself. How are you feeling? Because if you really believe how the mind math plays out, you will be reacting. Another way of saying that is you will be showing up. You will be behaving from that feeling 100% of the time. However you are feeling in the moment, that trips the trigger of your behavior 100% of the time. So it's so good to know how you're feeling at any given moment, because then you can connect the dots back to, okay, why am I feeling that way? It's a thought. Right? Sometimes it's this deep-rooted belief that we have to really kind of tease apart. Sometimes it's just this knee-jerk reactive thought that flies through our head and we feel something from it. Regardless, doesn't really matter. But if you are going to be showing up in such a way from that feeling, you want to know why. So let's go back to this curveball that's been thrown at you today, that the rental property has been trashed. You're feeling
Yes.
what?
Okay. Do you know what? I do want to talk about that, but I think what made me really think this was pertinent information was that I could so clearly see that as being a barrier and time consuming that
Mhm.
yes, my attention all needs to go there right now. And I think what sneaks in on me more so than that, and I know you'd agree with this, but it's those self-induced barriers. And when I think about what are my self-induced barriers, this is what else Tracy and I were talking about is you're about to go rent a place. So you were being empathetic with like, I've been the renter on the other side and thinking about it being somebody's home for a whole month because you can, because your kids, are at a season of life where you can go spend a month somewhere warmer and enjoy. And it made me think, I am always fighting for, I want that happiness when kids leave the house. And so I always have this forward thinking going, which I think is good and fine, but I've almost limited myself to what my capabilities are now
Mhm.
because I think I'm supposed to just be sustaining right now. My time and attention is supposed to be kids and all these other things that just pop up. But am I limiting myself because I'm so forward thinking?
Yeah. Yeah. So how would you answer that question? Do you feel,
Such a coach's response.
yeah, yeah. So do you feel limited? Do you feel confined with that kind of thinking? Just touch base with yourself, connect with yourself, ask yourself when you're really focused on that, that future vision, how do you feel right now?
Yeah, I feel like there's like, and someone's described it like this, but for anyone who's not religious, but like God's hand kind of being on your shoulder and saying, hold, hold, hold. And then when this right season comes and it's like, okay, run, that now's your time to, and that sits well with my soul to think of it that way because it makes me feel like it's okay to be in this holding pattern a little bit because my time needs to be elsewhere.
Mhm.
But to be like truly honest with I can talk out the other side of my mouth and say, of course it feels a little like encapsulating. And I feel like this is my role right now. And to step out of it, I feel a little guilty.
Yeah.
Where I also know I have a lot to offer from this, coaching side, business side that excites my soul. And I love what I'm doing. And yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've got a little bit of like black and white thinking going on. It's a either or. What would
Mhm.
it look like if you could have both? What would it look like if you weren't operating with that vision of the hold, hold, in preparation for something down the road? What would it look like if you had more of a like perspective of this might be, moving forward, maybe not, foot all the way down on the accelerator. Maybe it's just moving forward at a very moderate pace
Mm.
as you're moving closer to this time of your life. But it doesn't have to be an either or. What would that look like? Like, let's talk that through because I think you might find a little bit of peace and comfort in that visual.
Yeah. I knew you were going to ask this. So I actually did some journaling before we jumped on here today because I was thinking what is that? And so first there's like the unintentional barriers and then fear came to my mind. Like what are, if I'm being really brutally honest with myself, what are my fears that are holding me back? And I think that there's the whole perspective of what if it did take off? And what if time was really needed somewhere else? I think I definitely have this what if fear thinking
Mhm.
that I mean, there's this side that's like, great, that's such a good problem to have. And
Mhm.
then the other side of it that again doesn't totally fit my time schedule right now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So, any of those fear based thoughts, whether they're reasonable or not, they need to be answered. So, I would challenge you to answer the question of what if? What if the business does take off? so there would be more responsibility to serve the people who are buying what it is that you have to offer. Let's just talk about that. Then what?
Right. Like logical answer would be hire more dietitians, right? Like there is a logical answer to that.
Huh? And is that out of the realm of possibility?
No.
Okay. And do you think that that's a bridge that you could cross quite easily as the demand, like, is it something that you could actually take that next best step once it's required of you?
Yes.
Yeah. So the thought that I practice all the time, because I'm right there with you. Like, I think anybody with a human brain is right there with you. Like, we all have the what ifs. And here's how you combat the what ifs. All I have to do is take the next best step.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we think of like the whole big picture, I've got to figure this all out. That's very daunting. It's very overwhelming. And typically we shut down because that is a question. Trying to figure out the solution to that is difficult. But if we tell ourselves we only have to figure out that next best step, should that circumstance even arise, and we hope it does, but should that circumstance even arise, all I have to do is figure out the next best step. Now, we're using what some people would say, would be great if that happens. But let me kind of give you what the other side looks like. And this one really will hit home, especially for all the moms listening, because I struggle with this. My kids are older, they are of driving age, they're in college. And so they walk out the door and jump into their car, and I see out my window the car leaving, and immediately my heart goes, I hope they're safe. I hope they don't get in a car accident. Oh my God, what would I do? Right. And it's all those fear-based thoughts. That's just my primitive mom brain doing what primitive mom brains do. And I can sit here and I can like totally spin out on that. Or I can just remind myself, that's just my primitive brain trying to keep me safe. And that seems weird. That seems very counterintuitive. By offering you those thoughts, how in the world is that keeping you safe? Well, it does that because you don't ever want to be surprised. It wants to be like, this could happen. And so we don't want it to catch you off guard. And so we're going to offer you those thoughts so that you're well prepared should that ever happen, right? So those thoughts come to mind. And instead of me starting to get panicky about it, I just call it out for what it is. That's just that primitive brain. It happens because I'm now 50 years old. And since my kids were born, so I've been practicing those kind of thoughts for 23 years. That is a well-established neural pathway. I see the car go up the driveway. I have that primitive brain thought. Now that I understand the science of the brain, I don't make it mean anything about me. That's just what the human brain does. So I call it out. Okay, there's that primitive mom brain right there. And if they were to be in a car accident, God forbid, but if they were to be in a car accident, I have the confidence that I would just take the next step necessary, whatever is required of me. In that moment, all I would have to do is take that next step that's necessary. And I'm pretty confident that I could do that. But thinking about what would I do if they were in a car accident, a serious car accident, like asking that question is not helpful. It's not helpful because your brain spins out on it. So thinking about just, am I confident that I could just take one step at a time to work through that circumstance? Of course I could. Same thing with you. Instead of trying to figure out how do I handle this circumstance if the business were to take off, what would I do? Try on that thought of, I'm confident that should that circumstance show up, all I would need to do is just take the next most appropriate step necessary.
Yeah, so good. It's so funny because I feel like as from a nutrition and fitness coach perspective, it's such an easy thing to throw at my clients and say, with movement, with food, just like the next meal, just the next workout opportunity. So I can preach it all day long and love getting it right back, fed right back to me. It's that way. Yeah.
Amen. Amen. And I this hits home for me, not only in the kids circumstance, but in the over drinking circumstance. I never in a million years would have imagined that I could eliminate alcohol from my life. I loved having the glass of wine at night to take the edge off. And for years, I battled that kind of dependency and could not imagine going even an evening without having that glass of wine. But that's because I was looking at the rest of my life instead of just looking at tonight. And what is it that I'm really trying to create for myself with that glass of wine? It was really kind of a relaxation, a way to take the edge off. How do I create that? If I truly don't want to drink alcohol, if I'm not looking for something outside of me to solve that problem, how do I create that relaxation or that comfort or that peace for myself without the substance? How do I create that for myself within? And it's always a thought. It's always a thought. So all I have to do is take the next appropriate step. What would that be? And self-coach. So we've given several different circumstances. Hopefully your listeners can relate to one or really kind of, manipulate it a little bit to apply to their life, because it's a great question to really prompt a level of confidence that you are absolutely capable of taking just that next most appropriate step.
Yes. Thank you. Truly, I agree. I think this is a beautiful wrap up that we can just give people the homework. The two things I wrote down are, how are you feeling? To always come into situations and don't forget to ask yourself the feelings. And then what is the next best step? Because if we did do that every day, we would find ourselves in a different situation. And again, we all need reminded of it. Like you telling me this today it's in my journal and I'm going to flow with this. And last time we talked, you talked ingenuity over expertise, because I was really stuck in this, like, I need more expertise in an area. And you brought me back to more like, are you listening to your gut and what's worked for you in the past? And so I think if our listeners hear anything, it's like, we keep expecting this big bang of one thing providing all of this result. And it always comes back to the 20% of the small items all lining up for us. And that we need constant reminders that that's like that you're doing it. It's just not how you thought you were supposed to be doing it. So
Exactly.
Yes. Thank you so much. I'm loving this and I appreciate your time so much.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, we shall meet again and have a great rest of your day.
You too.
All right.